All right, welcome back to anyone who is listening, watching, whatever format this interview ends up taking. My name is Hannah, and this is the Mythical Writing Project. I'm joined again with Dr. Craig Chalquist, and we're continuing our conversation on the hero archetype. And among the many things that Dr. Craig does, he teaches the classes on the Jung platform. I guess you say it Jung if you're European, named Carl Jung, and us, as well as teaching classes at other institutions. He teaches on the online Jung platform, and they have a great number of classes. And among the ones I've taken with Dr. Craig, I would say that my it's a hard call. The trickster class was very good. I don't know, but I think my favorite were the two classes that you did on codependency. And a lot of people may be familiar with that term. Maybe they know what it is, maybe they've just heard it. But your first codependency class, that you did, I know the tagline for it was, or I think it was, a course for weary heroes.
Yeah.
Okay, I got that right. And then you also told in that class that you had the hero Ivan from the Russian tale you talked about in our previous interview in mind when you gave that. But if you could elaborate for the listeners, why was the codependency course, the class for weary heroes?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. It takes a lot of energy to be codependent. And we're trained that way. We come by it honestly. We're raised that way. Somebody's got to be the adult in a family. Somebody's got to be the one who makes sure things get done and people don't fall into ditches or are irresponsible or go hungry or whatever. So we get trained up early to be that. It's almost like we're substitute parents. And it's heroic because the, the core of codependency is somebody needs my help. I'm the only one who can do it, and I need to save them from something. And so there's a need for people to be dependent, hence the word codependent. So in rescuing, saving, helping, whatever it is that we're doing, oftentimes, unless we get paid to, we're actually making them worse. We're unconsciously encouraging them to depend on us so we can keep being heroic, because that's the way we learned that we were worthy, that we were worth something. So I think that's a big piece of what drives it.
You were talking about in the Russian tale where there's, the two Ivans, and it's one of the Ivans, right? Who's the hero where, they knock on his door to save the Tsar's daughter from a sea monster, and he does it, and then they knock on his door again to save the other Tsar's daughter from, I don't know. I guess there's no shortage of monsters and threats.
Yeah,
But the idea there, I think, in the story and also in your elaboration of it is, if you label yourself a hero, you're never going to be out of work. There's always
yeah,
going to be, and
badly
if people
paid work.
know you by that label, they're never going to stop knocking on your door. One day it's a sea monster, the next it's a cat in the tree, and next it's a flat tire, and next it's an evil dictator, it's the next, there's
Yeah,
any number of crises that need a hero. Um,
yep,
and I think what's interesting to me about how there was so much interesting to me in your two codependency courses, and I highly recommend them. In whatever format this interview comes up, I'll link to the platform and whatnot. But what's interesting to me is that, well, one, someone who is struggling with codependency or labeling myself, or even if I want to label myself, at least realize I have that tendency. And the way I understand it is there's this need to be needed. You've,
yeah,
you've been conditioned to be the helper or the rescuer or the wise advisor. And a lot of people, like me, have probably been in this position since childhood for various reasons. And it gets to a point where, one, yes, if people know you that way, there's never going to be a shortage of people that need help when they know that you are the designated helper in the family, in the office, in whatever context you're in. And also the internal tendency that even if people aren't knocking on your door asking you to, fight sea monsters or whatever, if you have this internal conditioning, most of the times unconsciously, you are getting yourself into those situations and perhaps even unconsciously seeking those situations. So if no one's knocking on Ivan's door, Ivan's going to find somebody. He's going to be walking in the wilderness and they'll come out up to him, or he'll find someone in need of helping.
Which
And
is what happens. That he's out on the road. Yeah. So he didn't stay at home. He was out on the road. So he brought it on himself.
and this idea, and again, if you're we were talking about this in the last interview, how all of these characters are in your psyche in some way, and when you
Yeah.
are expressing one, especially to an extreme degree, it means you're repressing the others. So
Yep.
the quote unquote codependent or the weary hero, the typical way would be like, oh my gosh, I just can't catch a break. Everybody needs me all the time. And it takes a real amount of consciousness and a flip in perspective to think, what am I doing to create and perpetuate this? Like you said,
Right.
if people always need my mother used to say, if you're good at your job, you'll never run out of work, but you won't always get paid or recognized for that work. People will,
Yeah.
yeah, she was a nurse.
Yep.
Um, but then just, I think it takes a lot of awareness to realize, how am I'm not working myself out of a job here if I keep, unless it really is your job. Like, and I know you would agree, like if you're an EMT or a fire,
Right.
then you signed up for that. You can't be
Yeah.
complaining. Like, damn, all these houses are on fire.
Yeah.
But it's another thing if you are putting yourself in positions where people need you. And even another thing, the amount of satisfaction that you get from it, even during the complaints. And I think that's the addiction that's hard
Yeah.
to, and that I have to find ways to break myself.
Mm.
Um, and I didn't know if you wanted to say more about that.
I was reminded of my aunt who was a firefighter, paramedic, helicopter pilot, and a bunch of other stuff, forest ranger. When you see old, like back from the 70s, when you see Smokey the Bear costumes, like in commercials and stuff like that, that's probably her. She wore that outfit for those. Complained about how hot they were, no air conditioning, and she had pretty clear boundaries around this. So she did all that professionally, and then when people tried to lean on her for something else, she would say, "Are you kidding? I spent all week rescuing people. I'm tired." So that's what it looks like professionally, right?
Hmm.
And psychotherapists always fall into this. Well, not always, but many of us do. We have poor boundaries about stuff like that. And so a psychotherapy supervisor once told me, make sure you're getting paid for it. And she wasn't being greedy. She was setting a psychological boundary.
And that seems to me a difference between, this is a role I play, and I
Yeah,
know when I'm on and when I'm off. And again, that's hard. I'm a teacher, and teachers never stop teaching, no matter what they do. I could walk into
yeah.
someone, like I'm teaching children how to count, children of strangers how to count change in the grocery store. And I'm like, I have to stop, or I'm going to creep out someone's face. So what it is, and at what point your work becomes your identity, that's a very big conversation. But I can see a distinction between, this is a role that I play. It's like when the judge puts on on the robe, or um, the firefighter puts on all their gear or something. And like, I choose to play this role. I know what the boundaries are. Um, and it's another thing to be like, this is who I am. And people come to me even when I don't want them to. And why is always everybody asking me for help all the time? And you're not thinking, what am I doing? How am I dissuading this? Am I putting up boundaries? Am I putting myself in the same situations with the same people? Because that's the
Yeah,
other addiction, trying to help people who don't want to be helped or can't be helped long term without their own participation. Because
yeah.
that's again the hero victim, or the savior and the saved. If the person who needs to be constantly saved or rescued isn't learning anything from it, then you're just going to keep doing the cycle, and you're both going to be stuck in these identities, and then the one who thinks they're a savior, and probably not consciously. You'd have to really have a big ego, I think, to be like, I'm the savior, but a lot of people who work in helping professions, whether they're dangerous or not, but a lot of help there, it's in their mind, that's who they are. And it's hard to turn somebody away, or it's hard. You get in this position, it's so easy to get into this conscious or unconscious guilt. If I don't help them, who will? If I don't help them, they're going to be on their own and they're going to die. And in some cases, maybe. I'm not saying don't do a search and rescue for, whatever. But in
Yeah.
others, it's if you're not giving someone or a group of people a chance to develop their own skills, you're, handicapping them in the long run.
Yep.
And I don't mean that in any derogatory way against, disabled people, but you're not allowing them to cultivate their own capacity. And at what point can you pretend it's not about your ego? At what point I think that was hard for me to grapple with the conscious and unconscious pleasure that I get from being in this role,
Yeah.
uh, even as I complain about it.
Yeah. I think sometimes of when new trees are planted somewhere, the gardeners will often put scaffolding around them. And they always, if they know what they're doing, they keep the scaffolding loose because when a wind comes along, the tree actually moves a little bit when the wind blows on it, and it encourages the tree to develop roots that hold it in place. If you scaffold it too tightly, and then you remove the scaffold when the tree's an adult, then in the first big wind, it'll just fall right over. So I think codependency creates trees that fall over, but not by conscious intention, but that's the effect of it.
And again, like we were talking in the earlier conversation, it's not just one person is trained, entrenched in a certain way of thinking. It's that entire groups or systems support a particular way of thinking. And if we're already in a kind of conditioning, like we need a hero, we're going to need a hero, a savior, someone to get us out of this, then there's going to be a world of saviors and saved, rescuers and rescued. And especially if we're not looking at the complexity of the situations. Like, if you
When I've
find,
trained,
well,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
please.
When I trained interns in family systems psychotherapy, I would always ask them, here's this over reliant, over dutiful child in the family who's basically the second parent. What do you think would happen if they stopped doing that? And the right answer is the family would unconsciously pick another child to be in the same role. And they would keep doing that pathological behavior until the family finally realized we're the problem and then got into therapy or just transformed somehow. So, same thing on a societal level. One hero goes away, then they get replaced by another one.
Mm.
Or a group of people finally wakes up. This happens somewhat less often because it takes more consciousness. And they go, it's on us. We have to do something about this. There's an interesting statement that the hero James Kirk makes in the OK Corral episode of the original series, where he's talking to a sheriff in Tombstone, Arizona, right before the shootout at the OK Corral, and the sheriff is saying, "Well, we need you guys to eliminate, basically the bad guys." And Kirk says, "Why don't you organize and bring together people to make the law work for them?" That's not heroic, but it's really good advice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to break out of a simplistic way of thinking. It's hard to even realize you're in it, and then even harder to retrain yourself mentally, and then try to be engaged in trying to decondition or untrain and retrain,
It's really hard.
a collective group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's driven by deep wounds, and they have to be mourned and worked through. And I had a great therapy client years ago who she kept getting into these relationships where she would caretake her male partners, and she said, "I like my men like I like my houses, fixer uppers." And she asked me one time, "What would happen if I actually fixed one of them?" And I said, "You'd lose interest. You'd go on to the next one.
Then
You'd
they don't
find a
need
fixer
you.
upper." So
Yeah.
gave her incentive to actually work it out, so she didn't have to keep doing that.
And again, I think I've said this in so many words, and I'm sorry I keep coming back to it, but it's that examination on the part of the person, what pleasure, whether or not I think of it immediately, is what am I getting from this? What am I extracting from this
Yep.
situation? And yeah, for me, I had this mindset, handed down from my mother who was. And again, I did not become a nurse. I was raised by two nurses. I never wanted to do it because there's always work. It never ends. You're on the clock, off the clock. There's always something happening. And my mom would be called in again and again. I'm the only person that can work this shift. I'm the only person that can, help that can relate to this patient. I'm the only person. And there's a weariness and a disgust, and also you have to see like the subtle pride in it. I'm the only person who knows how to fix this
Yep.
problem, and everyone must come to me, and how that starts rippling out into your life. And in me, I'm a teacher now. I'm an administrator. I manage a group of teachers, and I really, I was well liked by my students. And then I had to leave classrooms and replace myself with other teachers that I had to train. And I really had to get out of this. Well, first, I didn't want my students to think, oh, magical Miss Hannah can do everything and no one else can do what she does. Well, it's like, well, maybe everybody is exceptional and magical and unique.
Hmm.
And then what are you going to do when I leave? I'm
Yeah.
not the only person you can learn from. And yes, there are bad teachers and incompetent teachers, but this idea that yes, someone is so exceptional and so irreplaceable, when they're gone, everything will fall apart. And once you start thinking that way about someone, you're just inviting disaster, because no
Yeah.
one is immortal or inexhaustible or all giving.
Almost never true. And then when it does happen, it's like maybe it needed to fall apart. Maybe you were heroically staving off what was inevitable. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, like one person holding back a deluge or something, or yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good point. If one person is keeping everything together, maybe it shouldn't be together. There's some deeper problem happening that we should look at rather than pinning it all on this one person, to keep everything
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I feel like I could go in so many directions with this, and I know we have limited time. I think what was coming to me is how many of these people who don't even think of themselves as the hero, or who are critical of the hero and then are not reflective, and how the hero, capital T, capital H, gets related to the savior. Yeah, and all the different ways the savior could look. It could be the head of a nation, or it could be the head of a classroom, or an intensive care unit. And yeah, the constellation of like hero, savior, favorite is another one
Mm.
I've been thinking about, the favorite or the chosen one. And again, that can go way to back to family systems.
Yeah.
Um, and then the psychological term codependent, the person who needs to be needed. And so even if people don't have grandiose conceptions of themselves as the hero, it is more common, this way of thinking than, you know, we might consciously know.
Absolutely. It's drummed into us. It's how all our media played to us in movies and books, and it's only the hero who can save the day.
Hmm. This one teacher, this one white teacher in an inner city school is going to turn everything around. Like the people in
It
the
was
school and the students didn't already know the
yeah.
problems and weren't trying to work them through. Yeah.
There's a Star Trek movie where two heroes are arguing with each other in this kind of other dimension of the universe called the Nexus, and one of the heroes is James Kirk, who got himself more or less retired by doing something heroic and getting blasted out of his spaceship. And the other one is Captain Picard, and Picard's trying to convince him come back into our world, and there's this critical situation going on and we need your help. You're the only one who can do it. And at first Kirk pushes back and he goes, you know, I was out saving the galaxy when your grandpa was in diapers, and frankly I think the galaxy owes me one. And so he Picard finally does talk him into going on one last mission, and like the whole film depends on this, right? The plot would just fall apart if he said no. But I wish I could have like popped into the Nexus for a minute and told Kirk, you have a codependency issue. Retire. You've got a nice cabin, you've got a nice girlfriend, you've got horses. Just forget it, you know?
Boring.
The end, you know, the credits roll and, you know. So,
Yeah, it's not just that people are also knocking on your door, it's you are answering it and saying yes.
yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because people won't stop knocking at your door until you start telling them go away and
Yeah.
meaning.
Yeah, the lie is that we really are necessary.
And that's, I
What
think,
about
go
what
ahead.
about being necessary for ourselves? What about being necessary for our relationships? I mean, who's really paying the price when you're out there doing all that heroism? Heroes, the illusion of heroism is that they do everything on their own, but there's a whole support network that's enabling them to do this. So what about them?
Yeah. 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 And that's another trope in media and tragically I'm sure in real life. Like the hero whose kids never see them or,
Yeah.
because there's always something greater to save than what's at home. And as long, and again, I think you could talk about the addiction to a cause or the addiction to the mission. Um, I think, yeah.
And those kids are in therapy for the rest of their lives trying to get over the fact that they had some missing parent leave a big scar on their soul that will never entirely heal.
And they were not as important as saving the world or saving the environment or defeating whatever the
Yeah.
villain was, that all of that took precedent over. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things we did in men's groups a lot, we had lots of would-be heroes in the men's groups, court referred guys, and they had this heroic way of it's got to be me, and and we would just pull that to pieces. Like, well, why can't it be a single hero, somebody who doesn't have family obligations? Why can't that be the case, right? I mean, once you start looking for it, there's all kinds of different outcomes. There was this one guy I worked with. They were all in there for committing violence and getting arrested and doing jail time. And then when they came out, they came to us. So there was a guy who came in all bruised up, and I said, "Okay, tell us what happened before you get hauled off to jail for it." And he goes, "Well, I was walking down the street and I saw this guy beating up his girlfriend, and so I intervened because I've learned in the group that that's wrong. He's about her." And he goes, "You know what happened?" And I said, "Yeah, they both kicked your ass." And he goes, "How did you know?" And I said, "Guess who's going to jail? Not them, right? Not the guy who was committing the violence initially, right?" So we before he went to jail, we did a little session on so what would have been some of the alternatives, because there always are, almost always are. There are occasionally dire situations, but for the most part, 99 times out of 100, there's a different non-heroic course of action that works a heck of a lot better.
If you can accept being a less glamorized version of yourself, if you can detach from the archetype, if you can, yeah.
You can't wear the cape this time. Can't wear the cape, but you can get it done, right?
So as we close out, and I knew this was going to happen, that as soon as we started talking, I would have like 40 other things that I wanted to talk about, and I hope that, we can continue having other conversations. But before I close this out of this session, can you just say a little more about the projects that you're working on now, particularly the community that I'm a part of with Lamp Cove and
Yeah.
Paranoia Academy?
So for a while, I've wanted there to be space online for dreamers and visionaries and healers to talk to each other and imagine new ways we can be together, new ways we can form community. So that would be Lamp Cove, and it's actually wrong side. I always get mixed up on Zoom. It's here. If you go here, there's a community tab, pronoia.org. So there's that. We're building a school around it. It's going to be outside of higher ed, and it's to train people I call lamplighters who actually are involved in changing the world, but not heroically. They're post-heroic agents of change, and they work through storytelling, inspiration, community building, things like that. Those tend to make more lasting change than single heroic actions. For more information about that, read about Gotham City, but or just the news, right? That's the other thing about heroism; it doesn't last. It saves the day for one situation, and then the sequel. But so yeah, I would mention that. I don't know. I'm up to a lot of things. The other thing I'll mention is we touched on it earlier, but I write fiction. I have a cycle of books that are speculative fiction, mostly on the science fiction side with some magical realism mixed in. And they deal with the question of how will we grow up as a species? So those are fun. I'm working on the sixth book right now. Worked on it a little bit this morning. I talk to my characters in my imagination, and they have useful things to say, so I usually take their advice. Hopefully it shows up in the books. But those are a few things I'm up to. Yeah. Thank you for this. Thank you for inviting me into this conversation.
Oh, you are very welcome. You are very welcome. And I certainly hope we do more.
Mm.
And whatever this is that I'm doing, the mythical writing project, I'm not entirely sure yet, but I've built it, trying to get people to come. So on that note, I'll say thank you to anyone who is listening, and I hope you're able to check out some of the resources that we talked about, and I'll put links and different things for people who want to learn more. So thank you very much.